Chapter 901 Memory Thread. Saying goodbye to Pierce, Marks didn't mean to delay at all. The next day, he set up the red loyalty curse in this mansion, and ordered the Granger family to stay in the manor at ease during this time and not go out at will. "Are you leaving tomorrow, Marks?" "So soon?" Hermione said reluctantly. "Well, it is a very urgent matter. It will probably take a week or two. I should be able to come back before school starts," Marks said hesitantly, searching for Thunderbirds and finding out the whereabouts of Grindelwald. "It will take 10 days and a half months soon." "Okay." Hermione raised her lips and stretched her tone. It was clear yesterday that they had agreed to take time to go to London together for a good stroll. However, the little witch also understood that what Marks could do so eagerly must be a very important and even extremely dangerous thing, so she did not object to it, but stepped forward to hug Marks. "Be sure to pay attention to safety." "Ha! It's not something dangerous," Marks explained in a whisper. But Hermione obviously didn't believe it very much, staring at him intently, as if she wanted to see something on his face. Marks scratched his head and quickly turned off the subject. "By the way, I put the Ravenclaw crown in the bookcase in the alchemy room. If you need it, you can wear it at all times. But remember, don't stay up late to read." Marks reached out his hand and nodded the little witch's forehead, saying warningly. Hermione pouted and looked at Marks with dissatisfaction. She didn't stay up all night, but occasionally fell asleep after reading a book. "If I encounter something that I don't understand while reading, can I contact you through the magic mark?" Hermione asked, and she suddenly realized that although she and Marks need to be separated for a long time, they are actually at any time can be interconnected. "Of course, no problem, as long as there is nothing else. We can talk all day long," Marks responded with a smile. The little witch snorted with a blushing face, annoyed that she wanted to hammer Marks on the shoulder. Marks cleverly avoided, but the smile on his face was somewhat reduced, and he continued to speak cautiously. "But if I happen to have something important, I may temporarily cut off the communication function. Although the magic mark is easy to use, it can sometimes cause unnecessary troubles. Therefore, he usually cuts off the communication function temporarily during the battle to avoid distraction. As for your alchemy course, just use this." Marks put his wand on his temple, and after a while he pulled out a trace of white mist, and was dragged into glass bottles one by one. "This is memory thread," Hermione guessed, looking at the mist in the bottle in surprise. "Yes. This is my memory of learning alchemy and making alchemy creations. You can browse it with a penis." Marks nodded, sinking one of the memory threads into the pen, indicating that the little witch can do it. "Give it a try." Hermione eagerly immersed her face in the meditation basin according to Marks's instructions. About 3 minutes later, she raised her head again, looked at Marks, and said excitedly, "Oh my God! How did you come up with this method?" "Use memory to learn." "Is the effect okay?" Marks asked curiously. "It's amazing," Hermione said with a smile. In the world of memory, she can clearly see every step of Marks's making magic items, which is much better than just reading those alchemy books. The most important thing is that the memory can be browsed repeatedly, just like a tireless teacher rehearsing in front of her over and over again. "Hogwarts should have added this to the usual course," Hermione vowed, "so that there is no need to worry about losing some important knowledge in class because of distractions. It's not as simple as you think. Only an excellent Pantheon can extract his own memory, and this thing is very private. Not many wizards are willing to share it with others." Marks said dumbfoundedly. It was the close relationship between him and Hermione who dared to do this. Even so, Marks still had a weird feeling when Hermione looked at the memory just now. After making a study plan, Marks took advantage of the last half of the day to take Hermione to stroll around London, relax for a while, and then went to the Mole airport alone in the early morning of the next day, ready to fly to France. Although he had traveled to France through apparition several times when he was learning alchemy from Nicole before, they were all teleported according to specific coordinates. Now that coordinates have been erased and Marx has to use some less magical ways to solve travel problems. Fortunately, after years of development, mole transportation is very convenient. It only takes more than an hour to fly from England to the destination. After getting a forged ID through the Ministry of Magic, Marx passed the verification very smoothly, and got on the plane to enjoy the feeling of being a mole. After leaving the airport, Marx stopped a taxi to the mysterious seaside town. The driver is a bald man in his 40s who looks very rich, but a bit too stubborn. He enthusiastically shared his life experience with Marx, a tourist college student along the way, and complained about the recent awfulness. The weather is overwhelming. It's been 2 weeks, and there was no sun for a day, and it rained every day. This weather, the bald man said annoyedly. His home is in this small town. If it rains for a few more days, he felt that his furniture was going to be moldy. Listening to the other party's words, Marx couldn't help but turned his head and glanced at the window. The outside world was raining non-stop, and the sky was densely covered with dark clouds. The whole town was shrouded in a silent and depressive atmosphere. If this situation lasts for half a month, it is indeed very problematic. No wonder the spies of the Ministry of Magic think that a trace of Thunderbird can be found here. Just as Marx was thinking about it, the reading www.uukanzu.com taxi gradually slowed down and stopped at a remote hotel entrance. This place seems to be some years old. The house number looks very old, and the advertising stickers on the outer wall are all fell off. If conditions permit, you'd better change your place to live. The law and order in this area has not been very good. The bald driver hesitated and reminded, "Thank you for your suggestion, I will pay attention to safety." Marx paid and got out of the car, and said freely he felt that this place was very suitable for wizards, secluded and secretive. "I don't listen to persuasion," the middle-aged driver mumbled. Then he stepped on the accelerator and quickly disappeared to the end of the street. P.S. Congratulations to book friend 20210121193712899 for becoming the 5th leader of this book. Thank you very much. Recently, I saved manuscript and try to add more. End of this chapter. Dear, click in, give a good comment. The higher the score, the faster the update. It is said that the new full marks are found at the end of The Beautiful Wife. The new revision and upgrade address of the mobile station, date and bookmarks are synchronized with the computer station, and fresh reading without ads. Chapter 902. This is magic. They are wizards. Marx waved his magic wand to separate the rain from the sky, then adjusted his clothes, opened the door of the hostel and walked in. As soon as he entered the door, a warm air rushed up, and the flames of the old-fashioned fireplace on the right wall were burning, blocking the outside cold and humidity. Marx looked around and found that the hotel is a three-story structure. Presumably to increase some income, the first floor was transformed into a small restaurant. Although it hasn't arrived yet, many people are already sitting on the long tables by the stove. Probably all the tourists who live here. The owner of the hotel is an old white man with grey hair and glasses. He is now leaning on a chair at the front desk, looking intently at a newspaper in front of him, without even hearing the door opening. What caught Marx's most attention was that the two weird men in long robes in the dining room seemed incompatible with the surrounding moles at first glance. Wizard? Marx frowned, and quickly confirmed the identity of the other party. He couldn't help but feel a little strange. Normally, after the wizard entered the mole realm, he would be exposed to a little disguise, at least not so conspicuous. You know, this is not a place like the Broken Cauldron Bar. Most of the tenants are moles who don't know magic. But curiosity returned to curiosity, and Marx didn't mean to come up with it. The two wizards were definitely not the people he wanted to meet. Their ages and appearances were very different. The newcomer Marx didn't want to have more troubles. This is that France is not England. not to mention that he still has important things. There is no need to make trouble for himself. Considering that there was still about half an hour before the agreed meeting time, Marks went to the front desk to ask for a lunch, found a loc position and sat down. After thinking about it, he went out of the wastebasket, pull out a white paper towel and place it on the corner of the table. This is the contact code that Pierce told him, saying that it was specifically requested by Rolf. Marks really wanted to complain about this. A good meeting? How did it look like an undercover joint? Marks shook his head secretly, picked up the hard baguette and gnawed 2 bites, and listened with interest to the moles around to talk about parents, and he recovered some of the feeling of being an ordinary person. Really, don't believe me when I say it. When I was climbing the mountain 2 days ago, I saw a monster the size of a house with 3 pairs of wings and golden feathers. It's just a pity that I didn't take it down. Just as Marks was gnawing on the French stick, a voice came from the right. Marks turned his head and looked over, and saw a mole with a round hat sharing it with a few friends enthusiastically. My own weird experience the other day. It's just that not many people believe in his remarks. What age is it now, if there is such a monster that can be hidden? I was arrested by the army for an exhibition. I dare to assure you that everything I say is true. It has rained every day these days, and it must have something to do with that monster. The mole with the round hat blushed and shouted loudly, "Come on, Cole, there is nothing new in your story," a white woman said with a sneer. Last week, someone said that a few magical wizards came from the town, and they took a short stick and fought in the alley. It turned out that it was just a few tricky gimmicks. Hearing the dispute between the people, Marks found it very interesting, especially when he glanced at the middle-aged mole with the round hat a few more times, wondering whether to find the other person to inquire about Thunderbird. Suddenly, Marks's brows frowned, and his gaze suddenly focused on the 2 wizards in long robes, and he felt a wave of magical power from them. The next moment, the white woman who was still talking about juggling suddenly fell to the ground, and the chair behind her just disappeared inexplicably. Who did it? The woman got up from the ground in desperation and turned her head back annoyed. She thought it was the wicked guy who sneaked over and took her seat, but the strange thing was that there was no one behind her, so she looked for it. Less than half a chair. "Anne, your chair seems as if it disappeared by itself," the mole named Cole said in a shocked tone. He just witnessed the chair underneath the others being brushed and disappeared. "You said my chair disappeared on its own?" "Absurd," Annie yelled angrily, but her voice trembled slightly, and she somewhat doubted whether she had encountered some spiritual event during the day. The moles next to him were dubious, but soon there was another scream. "Snake!" A long green snake sprang out from under the table, bowed and spit out the snake's letter, and wanted to bite. The small hotel suddenly turned into a pot of porridge. Only Marks, who was sitting in a remote corner, could see clearly that the 2 wizards were playing tricks. Being used as a joke by several moles, he was upset and teased. He still barely understands it, but now it's a bit too much to really intend to hurt people. Thinking this way, Marks took off the half of the French stick in his mouth and threw it lightly on the ground. After landing, the long French stick quickly twisted and transformed into a snake mongoose, jumping out of the blind spot of everyone's vision, biting the snake's tail very flexibly, and pulling the snake body and jumping out of the window. In just 1 second before and after, the originally flaunting snake was taken away by an animal that ran out from nowhere, and everyone was a little confused for a while. The 2 wizards who were disturbed looked at Marks with unkind expressions, but before they had a seizure, the door of the hotel was knocked open. What broke in were a few Urras in grey costumes. After seeing the incoming person, the 2 wizards suddenly changed their faces, and they didn't care to teach the little devil who stirred their interest, and they were ready to run away as soon as they pulled out their wands. But it was too late, and the Urras attacked. The moment they saw them, "Expelliarmus, accept your weapon. Petrificus all petrochemicals." Stupefy fainted. A series of 7 or 8 spells quickly hit the two wizards who couldn't dodge. Novel.com. The battle was over after only a few seconds. The moles in the hotel opened their eyes one by one, watching this battle that was beyond common sense and was enough to make their worldview collapse. Magic, this is magic. They are wizards. Annie screamed loudly. The leader was obviously very experienced, and he didn't panic at all. He directly cast a confusion spell, and the 7 moles who were present sat back to their positions dizzy. Immediately, the remaining errors were very proficient in casting oblivion spells on each mole, making them forget those things that shouldn't be remembered, and using the restoration spell to restore all the tables and chairs that were destroyed during the fight. End of this chapter. Dear, click in, give a good comment. The higher the score, the faster the update. It is said that the new full marks are found at the end of the beautiful wife. The new revision and upgrade address of the mobile station, data and bookmarks are synchronized with the computer station, and fresh reading without ads. Chapter 903. Inquiry and Pendant. After fixing the yelling moles, the leader quickly turned his attention to Marks, looked at him carefully for a while, and questioned him. Tell me your name and purpose. Wizard. Most people don't come to this remote town deliberately at such a special time. Besides, you just acted on them and ruined our original plan. You need to know we have been following them all day. The hero's expression was very unkind. They finally caught 2 mice and were trying to see if they could catch a big fish. As a result, Marks entered the door with his front foot, and this happened in the hotel on the back foot. He even suspected that the wizard in front of him, who looked only 17 or 18 years old, was one of the accomplices of the 2 wizards. I think you have misunderstood, sir. This riot has nothing to do with me. It's just that these 2 wizards wanted to tease the moles in the hotel on a whim. Marks didn't panic at all and replied with ease. Tao, if you don't believe me, you can cross-examine these people. Having said this, Marks suddenly paused, suddenly remembering that the 2 were very secretive when they were casting spells. It seemed that the moles couldn't ask anything, let alone wash their suspicions. Fortunately, at this moment, the female error who had just walked over after casting the curse recognized him at a glance and said in surprise, Marks, why are you here? Hearing this slightly familiar voice, Marks turned his head and glanced. Speaking of a witch with bright silver hair, and a beautiful face with a different charm. Furong? Marks was a little surprised. He didn't expect to meet an acquaintance when he first arrived in France, or under such special circumstances. But after the surprise, Marks quickly reacted, looking at the standard robe worn by the witch, and said with a smile, I haven't seen you for more than a year. You have become an era. Congratulations. It's just an internship. I haven't formally joined the job yet. Furong shrugged and said modestly, but the corners of her mouth couldn't help but twitched. More than a dozen of their graduates in this period applied for the era, but only she was chosen alone. Ahem. The leader coughed slightly and interrupted the conversation between the 2 of them. He looked at Furong, who was inexplicably chatting with each other with dissatisfaction, and asked, Do you know him, Mr. Lacour? Is it possible that you are Buzz Barton's alumni? No. Marks is a student of HogWarts in England. We met at the Triwizard tournament, Furong explained, and then asked in surprise, Captain Bruno, haven't you seen McClown in the newspaper? Bruno froze for a moment. Of course he had heard of the Triwizard tournament last year. It's just that Booth Baton College lost terribly, and the limelight was robbed by the 2 warriors of HogWarts. Even the mainstream media reported vaguely, alluding to the warriors of HogWarts secretly cheating, so he didn't pay much attention to that match at all. Since you are a student of HogWarts, why do you come to France? Why come here in the small town? Bruno did not relax his vigilance just because the wizard in front of him was somewhat famous, and he showed no mercy. Questioning. If you have read any British newspaper, you should know that I skipped a grade and graduated from HogWarts this year. As for the purpose of my coming here, Marks hesitated for a moment, feeling that there was no need to conceal it, and said truthfully, let's put it this way, I am very interested in the research of magical creatures. so I took the initiative to apply to be Mr. Rolf's assistant to study and catch thunderbirds together. It is my certificate. Any questions, Mr. Bruno? Marx took out several pamphlets given to him by Pierce from his suitcase and put them on the table. This time he was not smuggled here, but was hired by the International Wizarding Federation, even though he was an apprentice. Name. Bruno glanced suspiciously at him, took up the documents on the table and checked it carefully. After confirming that it was true, he casually asked a few questions about the habits of thunderbirds and habitats. Seeing Marx's answer, the answer was fluent, only slightly lowered his vigilance. Marx was also relieved in his heart. Although he was not afraid of these errors, if the other party really wanted to embarrass him, it would be really difficult. I can't just beat up these law enforcement officers for a little thing, right? But France is not England. It would be bad if it caused a series of diplomatic problems. After dispelling the suspicion of Marx, Bruno strode to the two unconscious wizards, pulled one of them open and pulled out a silver triangle pendant from the inside. Marx's pupils, who peeked at this scene, shrank, because he was very familiar with the style of the pendant. It was the Deathly Hallows. No, it should be said that it was a symbol of a saint. More than 50 years ago, Grindelwald was obsessed with the power of pursuing the Deathly Hallows, and often used this symbol to refer to himself, so that his followers often carried similar things. Captain Bruno, take the liberty to ask, are these two criminals who have escaped? Marx asked tentatively. This is not something you should take care of, kid. Bruno looked at Marx very vigilantly, staring at him for a while before speaking. I'll give you another piece of advice. This town is not very safe lately. When you see a stranger, remember to stay away and don't just make trouble. Do you understand? I will pay attention, Marx said in a calm tone. And even if he put out his plan to obtain information from Bruno, it would be even more useless as far as the mind-trapping mind was concerned. The captain of the Arrow was very vigilant. He was obviously a veteran. If he took the initiative to start a seductive mind, he might be noticed by the other party. Mtlnovel.com. Then there would be no way to explain it. Bruno naturally saw that the wizard in front of him didn't listen to his words at all, but he reminded him that he had done his best, so he didn't say anything, and waved his hand to signal the Arrows to take the captured prisoners and leave here. Before leaving, Furong glanced at Marx apologetically. She was just an apprentice and had no right to speak, let alone stand up to help Marx. After the Arrows left together, the 7 moles in the hotel were relieved from the confusion curse one after another. They continued to eat and eat in a daze, as if the commotion that had just happened was just an illusion. No one noticed that they were sitting. The 2 people beside them have been taken away. Seeing this scene, Marx was somewhat aware of why many wizards would consciously be superior to others. To some extent, moles are the playthings in their palms. Even if they are played with, they don't know anything. End of this chapter. Dear, click in, give a good comment. The higher the score, the faster the update. It is said that the new full marks are found at the end of The Beautiful Wife. The new revision and upgrade address of the mobile station, data and bookmarks are synchronized with the computer station, and fresh reading without ads. Chapter 904. Rolf's Commander with Emotion. Marx didn't get too busy to tell the truth to these moles. Sometimes knowing too much can only increase worries. After a riot, the next meeting was much smoother than Marx had imagined. Just after one point, the people he was waiting for appeared at the entrance of the hotel on time. Rolf entered the door and looked around. After seeing the napkin Marx had placed on the corner of the table, he walked over here. Hello, Mr. Scamander. I'm Marx McClown. Marx stood up and stretched out his right hand, actively greeted him, while looking curiously at the 19-year-old wizard. No matter the dress or the temperament of the other party, he was different from any wizard he had ever seen before, probably because of the fact that he has been in the mountains and the wilderness all the year round. Rolf's physique looks very strong. His brown hair is unkempt and messy. His skin is dark brown, and his trousers and clothes are still covered, contaminated with a little clay. The scavengers who don't know where they are. Nice to meet you, Mr. McClown. Rolf stretched out his hand and shook Mark's hand, and sat down comfortably on the opposite position. I have seen your deeds in the European Times. It says that you are the most talented wizard in England, and you have defeated several errors in the exam. That's ridiculous. I can't say that the most talented is the most talented. At best, I just spent the time of other students playing around on learning. Marx said very low. Rolf had an inexplicable desire to complain, but in the end he held it back, cleared his throat and asked, "Also let me ask, why did you suddenly think of coming over to be my assistant?" Rolf is very puzzled about this. A talented wizard like Marx should apply for the ERA after graduation or find a clerical job in the Ministry of Magic for promotion. How could he go to France in a whimsical way, come to be his apprentice? Most importantly, he didn't apply for support from England or the International Wizards Federation at all, but Pierce suddenly forced someone over, who was a minor wizard who had just graduated, which made Rolf somewhat dissatisfied. The target Thunderbird this time is a particularly sensitive and magical creature. You must be very cautious in tracking and catching the opponent. Bringing a layman may actually do bad things. Marx naturally recognized Rolf's concerns and immediately explained. "Mr. Scamander, I have always been interested in all kinds of magical creatures, and I have learned a lot of related knowledge. This time I heard that a Thunderbird appeared in France, so I took the initiative to apply to join the capture operation. Please forgive me if I can ask for your consent in advance." As he was talking, Marx suddenly paused, and his left hand jerked into the sleeve on the right, grabbing something with a duckbill like a black guinea pig from it. After this round and round magical creature was caught by Marx, he was not afraid of life at all. Instead, he blinked his eyes and looked at him very innocently. "Is this the test you plan to give me, Mr. Scamander?" Marx asked jokingly, grabbing the black guinea pig by the tail. Rolf looked at the sniff in Marx's hand. His complexion suddenly became very embarrassed. He took Sniff over in an annoyed manner, flicked the other's head with his index finger in annoyance, and then looked at Marx quite a bit, said with a guilty conscience, "Ah, yes, I want to test your vigilance and see if you are suitable for this industry, McClown." So it seems that I should have passed. Marx did not reveal Rolf's meaning, but instead pointed to the large black guinea pig with a duckbill through this, and said, "Sniffing, the scientific name is Mud and Thunder. It is a kind of magical creature that can dig the ground and like to collect treasures. The magical part is of level 3x. It usually inhabits the territory of Great Britain. It has a gentle personality and can detect gold coins or treasures from far away. There is a space pocket on the chest, and black fur is an excellent material for making extended backpacks." Marx gushed about the habits, habitat, and ability of sniffing, including the value of fur and blood. When talking about these magical materials, Marx also took a look at the sniffing habit. Under Marx's kind gaze, the sniff that tried to get rid of his crimes shivered, and the forepaws held Rolf's thumb tightly. Rolf was very speechless and stuffed the sniff into his chest pocket. Now that he knew he was afraid, why did he go early? However, Marx's ability to narrate the various characteristics of sniffing in such detail made Rolf a little different from him. This at least proves that the other party is not a simple layman, at least an amateur who has done related homework. If you can follow the instructions, multiple assistants are not bad. It's just that Rolf doesn't understand why his pet suddenly ran to Marx. Although Sniff has the habit of collecting treasures, after all these years of training, it has been able to restrain his own. By nature, similar things have never happened in the past 2 years. Or does it mean that the other party has unimaginable treasures? Will Sniff ignore his commands? A few thoughts flashed in Rolf's mind. Although he was very curious, he didn't mean to ask more, but seriously told Marx about the details of the mission. He arrived in this town 3 days ago. After several days of exploration, he has initially grasped the approximate scope of Thunderbird's activities and formulated a decoy plan based on this. I bought a live lamb in a nearby village, and tomorrow morning I will apply a special spice to its fur.mentalnovel.com and put it on the nearby mountain. This spice can to attract Thunderbird's attention, All we have to do is to wait for the Thunderbird to finish hunting and follow it to find the location of the nest," Rolf said concisely. "Then why not just add some powerful anesthetic potion and pour it directly? Should this save a lot of things?" Marx asked in a puzzled way. "How easy is it? It must be Thunderbirds, a lively prey, to be fooled." Rolf shook his head, then turned to look at the dark clouds outside the window, and said solemnly, "And I suspect that this Thunderbird is probably in an injured state, with intense mood swings. Only in this way can we explain the weird weather this week." Marx nodded. Before he came, he had this doubt. Normally Thunderbirds are not so irritable. The bad weather in the haunt area usually lasts for a day or two and then disappears. This time it did not stop for a whole week. It was indeed very strange. End of this chapter. Dear, click in. Give a good comment. The higher the score, the faster the update. It is said that the new full marks are found at the end of The Beautiful Wife. The new revision and upgrade address of the mobile station, data and bookmarks are synchronized with the computer station, and fresh reading without ads. Chapter 905 Rolf's Animagus with a thought. Marx suddenly remembered the two wizards who had been arrested just now, and couldn't help but ask, "Who do you think will be attacking Thunderbird?" "I don't know, maybe it is a group of morally corrupted poachers." After all, an adult Thunderbird's corpse can sell for thousands of gallons on the black market. It is hard to keep others unmoved. Rolf sighed quietly. Similar things he had seen his father travel the world many times, so that some rare and magical creatures were almost wiped out by these bastards. However, Marx did not agree with Rolf's point of view. First, the Thunderbirds were transported to France, and then Grindelwald's minions were haunted nearby. It was hard for him to believe that this would be a coincidence. But if it has something to do with Grindelwald, it doesn't make sense. What can the other party do with Thunderbird? You won't be like yourself, collecting Thunderbird's blood and fusion bloodline, right? This idea just emerged from my heart and was eliminated by Marx. With Grindelwald's magic level, I don't have to wait until now if I want to rely on the fusion of blood to improve his strength. The other party is not able to rely on the system to solve multiple bloodlines like myself. Conflict issues. In short, this mission may be very dangerous. In addition to Thunderbirds, we might also meet with those poachers. So while resting this half day, you'd better think about it carefully. The real battle is not a joke. Rolf exhorted very solemnly. Although he has seen reports in the European Times that Marx defeated 3 eras, he thinks it should be mostly showcasing now. After all, Marx McClown looks too young in front of him. Even if the magic level is really high, his experience in combat must be seriously inadequate. In a formal battle, it is not whoever releases the powerful spell that can win. And the opponent will not be so stupid as to wait for you to prepare for a duel. No, Mr. Scamander, I have the ability to protect myself, and I am ready to fight, Marx said in a flat tone, but there was a sense of irresistibility in the words. Well, since you insist on thinking that way. Rolf nodded and didn't advise him anymore, just thinking in his heart that he would look at Marx more when the time comes to avoid any danger to the other party. After initially agreeing on a plan for catching Thunderbirds, Marx and Rolf went to the hotel owner to book 2 rooms and begin preliminary preparations. Rolf is responsible for making the special spices that attract Thunderbirds, and Marx has taken over the task of making potions. This time they have to spend at least half a day in the wild. If they don't want to be bitten, it is best to need some potions to expel mosquitoes and conceal their bodies. Considering that there may be some unexpected situations in the mission, Marx also prepared an improved blood fusion potion in advance, and then only needs to collect some Thunderbird blood to perform the blood fusion ritual. The next morning, Marx took the potion that had been brewed and opened the door and walked out of the hotel, while Rolf had already been waiting at the door with a half-sized goat. Probably because of the confusion curse, the goat appeared very well behaved, without a leash, just following Rolf at the same pace. The potion you want. Marx took out 2 bottles of reagents backhand and threw them over. Rolf stretched out his hand to take it, and then he unplugged the bottle of the reagent and smelled it, confirming the efficacy of the drug before putting it away. The guinea pig-sized sniffer came out of Rolf's chest pocket with a yawn, as if he sensed the breath of treasure, looked around in a daze, and screamed when he saw Marks, and then hissed back into the bag, leaving only his tail and half of his outside. Marks touched his nose. Is he so scary? Rolf was dumbfounded and stuffed his sniffing tail into his pocket. Then he pulled Marks and drove a rented mule car towards the towering mountain forest to the west of the town. I didn't expect you to drive a car, Marks said unexpectedly. Sometimes, using mule transportation can save a lot of unnecessary trouble. Rolf shrugged and explained. Although the wizard's apparition is easy to use, if you want to ensure that the destination is accurate, you can usually only send it to the place you have visited before. So sometimes these convenient means of transportation can be of great use. Just chatting all the way, Rolf drove down the mountain road all the way into the mountainside, found a fairly flat clearing and stopped. I imposed a mole expulsion curse at the foot of the mountain. During this time, no irrelevant people will bother us. Rolf opened the door and got out of the car, explaining, pulling the goat from the trunk out, and took out the prepared special spices and smeared them on the goat's fur. Marks tried to smell it, but didn't smell anything. Probably only Thunderbird could recognize it. Do you want to help? Marks asked, pulling up his sleeves. Of course, two people can save a lot of time. Rolf did not refuse Marks's help, and asked him to help hold the goat so that this thing would not move. It took about 5 minutes for Rolf to get everything done, and finally he waved his wand to lift the confusion spell he had imposed. The poor goat just woke up and saw the two wizards staring at him fiercely. They ran away in fright, rushed into the dense forest, and quickly disappeared in front of them. The next thing we have to do is to follow it, not too close and not to lose it, and wait patiently until the Thunderbird appears. Rolf took out the previous 2 bottles of potions and poured them into his mouth. Novel.com. Then the figure was distorted and deformed. Yellow fluff quickly emerged from the top and bottom of the body, and the nails of both hands became slender and sharp. After a while, a sturdy leopard appeared on the mountainside. The sniff that had been in his pocket also fell out, but the little guy quickly crawled along the fur to the top of the leopard's head, stubbornly tugging a few hairs. By the way, how is your sneaking ability, McClown? Rolf adjusted to his deformed body, then turned his head and asked. However, looking behind him, Rolf unexpectedly found that Marks's figure had disappeared without a trace. Just as he was surprised, a voice came from midair. I think it's pretty good. Rolf looked up suddenly, and an owl slowly flew down from the sky and hovered in front of him. P.S. Thank you book friend 2021-012193712899 for the 50,000 starting currency rewarded, and thank you all for your vote and support. We will definitely update it twice tomorrow. Chapter 906 Thunderbird shot down. I didn't expect you to be an animagus, Rolf said in surprise. It's not a big deal, aren't you the same? Marks waved his wings and landed on the leopard's head, and replied, how can it be the same? Rolf rolled his eyes. He had suffered a lot in order to become animagus. And Marks's transformation was a flying creature, and his concealment and detection ability were better than his transformed leopard. The only drawback is that the combat effectiveness is a bit low. But while feeling sigh, Rolf did not forget the business. Since Marks is an animagus, it becomes much easier to hide his figure, so there is no need to worry about bad things because of exposure. By the way, McClown, when Thunderbird appears, remember to listen to my orders. Don't act privately. If you are unlucky and run into those poachers, don't force it. I will judge the other person. The number and combat power decide whether to abandon this operation. Rolf reminded very solemnly. Marks gave him a weird look, but finally nodded. Well, you are a professional, then do as you say. After reaching a consensus, an eagle and a leopard rushed into the dense forest together. After the delay, the half-size goat had already run away. Even if Marks had the advantage of high-altitude vision, he couldn't find the other side's footprint in this complicated jungle. Fortunately, Rolf, who has experienced many battles, is like a real leopard, leaning on his body while sniffing the breath of the prey while advancing fast, successfully positioning himself in just a few minutes. Got the goat's position. Rolf did not continue forward, but deliberately kept a short distance, using the low roar to drive the opponent to the top of the mountain, so that Thunderbird could find the trail of the goat more easily. Marks followed slowly, not daring to fly too high, so as not to become the first target of Thunderbird's attack. This chase and escape continued for more than half an hour. Rolf undoubtedly calculated the goat's physical strength very accurately. When he reached the top of the mountain, the other party was already tired and paralyzed in a clearing. What shall we do next? Marks slid down in midair, looking at the poor and helpless goat, who could only bleat and barked, and asked, "Wait." Rolf Barra said with his paws covering his body in the dense bushes, lowering his voice. "We need to be patient with Thunderbird. As long as we can calm down, this plan will be half successful." "Half? What is the other half?" Marks was very curious. "Luck. We'd better pray that the Thunderbird could not successfully capture the prey during this period, otherwise it might choose to stay in the lair, so we will be busy today," Rolf explained, his face turned very calm. In these years of research and exploration of magical animals, there are many examples of making sufficient preparations in advance, but ultimately failing and returning without success, so he has been watching it very openly. Marks nodded, knowing the same truth, and landed directly on the low branch next to him. Taking advantage of the free time to rest, Rolf was rarely interested, and shared his thrilling adventures with Marks in a low voice over the years, and by the way popularized all kinds of knowledge about survival in the wild. The waiting time was longer than Marks expected. They hid from morning until midnight without seeing the shadow of Thunderbird. The half-size goat regained its vitality, and was leaping about on the grass leisurely, lowering its head from time to time to gnaw a few bites of grass, looking very leisurely. Marks turned his head and looked at Rolf, and saw that he was lying in the bushes, squinting in a false sleep, very composure. Upon seeing this, Marks turned his body upside down, hung upside down on the branch, and began to close his eyes to cultivate. In the early hours of the morning, the bewildered Marks was awakened by a harsh thunder. Just when he opened his eyes, he saw several lightning flashes in the dense dark clouds, and the golden light spots could still be vaguely seen in the clouds. "Thunderbird!" Marks suddenly shook his head, and came out of the confusion, and immediately cast his gaze to the grass in front of him. The half-size goat was obviously aware of the danger, and wailed in horror, and rushed into the woods like crazy. Marks subconsciously flew out to chase, but Rolf's voice rang from the previous step. "Don't move, the sheep can't run, it's not the time to shoot." Rolf woke up long before the Thunderbirds arrived, and was staring at the goats and the movements of the Thunderbirds just like Marks, but he didn't take any action, because he was very aware of the Thunderbirds' hunting habits. Sure enough, shortly after he spoke, a lightning flashed out of the clouds and struck the goat's path. The dazed lamb was so frightened that he staggered and fell directly to the ground, and then just lay down. The ground was trembling and the body was motionless. Marks held his breath and turned his gaze to the sky. Now that the prey has lost his fighting spirit, the hunter should also be on the stage. A golden bird flew out of the dark clouds. It was like a beam of light. It swooped down from the clouds with a few swoops. With its sharp front paws, it tightened the half-large goat with one swoop. Caught. Marks finally got a glimpse of this Thunderbird. It looked the size of a mulcar, covered with pure golden feathers. The most peculiar thing was that it had 3 pairs of wings. The largest one, extending more than 5 meters, azure lightning can still be seen on the tail feathers. After the successful hunting, Thunderbird seemed to have no intention of enjoying food on the spot, and once again fluttered its wings and flew away, chasing. But remember not to get too close. You are reading www.uukanzu.com. Our goal is to find its lair. Don't act without authorization. Rolf said loudly, and ran out of the bushes the next moment. Get out. The leopard's speed is already extremely fast, coupled with the magical blessing, enough to allow Rolf to keep up with Thunderbird's movements. Mark's actions were not slow, and he followed Rolf closely. After flying for about 10 minutes, a towering cliff in the distance appeared in front of the two of them. Thunderbird did not continue forward, but kept hovering over the cliff. A cheerful smile suddenly appeared on Rolf's face. It seems that Thunderbird's lair is here. However, before he was happy for long, Rolf noticed that something was wrong, because Thunderbird had not returned to his lair for a long time and looked very anxious. Just when both of them felt a little strange, several brilliant spell beams suddenly laced from the cliff, and the target was the Thunderbird in the sky. P.S. 2 updates today. The second chapter will be published later. Chapter 907 Forbidden Air Circle suddenly under attack. Thunderbird's reaction was not unpleasant. It quickly dodged, and then let out a burst of angry screams. The pure golden wings shook with all their strength, and a few strong lightning blasted past. However, this was an inevitable blow, but it failed to play any role, and was easily disintegrated by the invisible barrier that rose in midair. Thunderbird's scarlet golden pupils stared at the 5 wizards below, and felt a great threat on the person who was in the lead. Almost instantly, Thunderbird made a decision, abandoning the lamp that had just been captured, and turned and fled. It's a pity that the assailant was clearly prepared, and the Forbidden Air Circle set up in advance was instantly activated, and the Thunderbird suddenly seemed to have received a heavy blow. His body became extremely slow, and finally fell staggeringly. Watching this scene, Marx was very anxious, but as a flying creature, he was also inevitably affected by the Forbidden Air Circle. In the end, he was forced to fall on Rolf's back. Leopard ran with himself. Damn it, how could those poachers move so fast? Rolf scolded angrily. His running speed increased again, and he wanted to get there before those people got it. I'm afraid it's not a poacher, Marx thought silently in his heart. He just flew high in the sky and saw the appearance of those people, and the wizard headed by them made him feel inexplicably familiar. Rolf didn't know the information, and hurried to the location where the Thunderbird fell. However, when he arrived, Rolf realized that the battle was over long ago, with bright red blood and a dozen golden feathers scattered on the ground. Damn it, let's take a step. Rolf transformed back into a human form, picked up a feather on the ground, and hammered the sand on the ground angrily. On the side, Marx was not surprised at all. Even if he was as powerful as a Thunderbird in front of that person, he couldn't hold on for too long, let alone the other party made sufficient preparations this time. Did you see those poachers in the sky just now? How many of them are there? Rolf asked through gritted teeth. 5 people in total, Marx said concisely. There's more to fight. Rolf secretly added up. Although there were more people on the other sides than them, he and Marx were not exposed, and they were still in the dark. If 1 or 2 people can be solved by a sneak attack, then the 2 sides can fight. Marx saw Rolf's plan at a glance, and immediately poured cold water. I saw Grindelwald among them. Just relying on the eyes of the heterochromatic pupils. Even if the opponent is several decades younger, Marx can recognize it. What are you talking about? Rolf was stunned, then took a breath and stammered, Green Devo, are you sure you are not mistaken? How could he suddenly come to France? In fact, I received relevant information before coming. Grindelwald has been active in France recently. But no one knows what he wants to do, Marx explained. This is difficult. Hearing Marx's words, Rolf's brows suddenly wrinkled. The news that Grindelwald had escaped from the prison of Numungard, he had naturally seen it in the European Times. But Rolf could not have imagined that he would run into such a legendary dark wizard one day. The catastrophe more than 50 years ago, he had heard his grandfather tell it many times, so he knew exactly what the name Grindelwald represented. This was definitely not a wizard they could contend. Thinking of this, Rolf planned to persuade Marx to abandon this mission and follow it alone to see if he could detect some important information. Now the degree of danger in this place has exceeded his imagination. Once encountering a battle, Rolf guessed that he would not be able to take care of Marx's safety at all. However, when he turned his head and prepared to persuade him, Mark's voice came first. Mr. Scamander, you'd better go back and notify the people at the Ministry of Magic immediately. The next battle may be very dangerous. I am not sure that I can protect your safety. Mark's expression was very serious. There is no joking at all. Yep. What? Rolf looked at Mark's dumbfounded. Shouldn't this be what I said? Rolf was startled by Mark's sudden sneer, and he couldn't react for a long time. After a reminder, Marks ignored Rolf, took out a blank reagent bottle in the wizard's robe pocket, and waved his wand to collect all the blood scattered on the ground. Almost enough, right? Marks shook the bottle and muttered to himself, so that the materials needed to fuse the blood have been gathered, and his main goal of coming to France was also perfectly achieved. If he is more cautious, he should stop now, find an undisturbed place to perform the 6th blood fusion ceremony, spend 10.5 months familiarizing himself with the newly acquired power, and then consider consulting Grindelwald. Decisive victory. But Marks was really curious about Grindelwald deliberately lurking in France. And what was the purpose of catching this Thunderbird with great effort? It must be very important to let the other party put aside the affairs at hand and do it in person. Realizing this, Marks immediately decided to follow up and take a look. Anyway, it's no better than before. You don't need to rely on bragging about your strength to stabilize your rule. It really can't be beaten, and it's a big deal. After making up his mind, Marks did not delay any longer, and changed his body shape from an owl to a vigorous cheetah. Novel.com, sniffing the remaining scent of Thunderbird blood, rushed all the way to catch up. Rolf witnessed Marks turning from an owl to a cheetah. He was stupid. Could Animagus still have 2 forms? However, it is obviously not the time to consider this. Seeing Marks' leaving figure, Rolf hesitated, and finally gritted his teeth and turned into the form of a leopard to follow. Even a minor wizard like Marks can put aside life and death, so what is there to be afraid of? The sniff on Rolf's head is using that small little brain, seriously considering whether to jump off the car halfway. The Thunderbird's terrifying power makes it memorable, but it is so powerful the magical creature was easily subdued by the enemy, and the hidden creatures could instinctively make it have the urge to run right away. It's just that this thought was quickly dispelled by another instinct, because it smelled a scent that couldn't be rejected in front of it. That was the smell of a lot of precious treasures. P.S. Thanks to book friends 2021-012193712899 for the 100,000 starting currency rewarded again. Tomorrow 2 more updates. Chapter 908 Terrible Thunderstorms and Space Nodes. Text Chapter 908 Terrifying Thunderstorms and Space Nodes. At the same time, in a clearing deep in the jungle, after the 2 wizards had arranged their protective magic, they looked at the wizard-headed and spoke. Mr. Grindelwald, the circle you need has been set up. Very well. You did a good job. Grindelwald stepped forward and patted the shoulders of the 2 of them, said admiringly, and then looked back at the captured Thunderbird. Just after suffering a violent beating, Thunderbird no longer had the arrogant appearance before, and looked very miserable. A long wound stretched from the chest to the left wing, and crimson blood constantly seeped out from the wound. The tail feathers are dyed golden red. In order to prevent Thunderbirds from escaping, the wizards even used transfiguration to make several huge chains to securely bind the opponents. Coupled with the weakness curse and the protective magic placed around them, the Thunderbirds escaped. Even it's hard to move a few times. It's not too late. You guys prepare, we will start now. Grindelwald said. The 4 wizards looked at each other, blessed themselves with an iron armor curse on their backhands, and then cautiously retreated to the far corner. Although vent your anger, let me see your strength. Grindelwald stared at the huge Thunderbird in front of him, gently waving his wand to lift the weakening spell previously imposed on the opponent. The Thunderbird, which had regained its mobility, stared at Grindelwald bitterly. Its golden pupils were full of anger. It raised its 6 wings high and made a piercing squeal. The magic power flowed, dozens of times. The stout lightning fell from the sky suddenly. The flickering arcs gathered together and instantly aroused a thunderstorm. The shockwave swept in all directions with a huge roar, and the dangerous and swift lightning spread like a spider web. Although the four wizards that had long been expected had done enough protection in advance, they were still inevitably affected, and the strong iron armor curse broke almost instantly under the mighty power of nature. Fortunately, at this time, the pre-arranged protective magic worked, and solid magic barriers rose from the ground, like four walls separating the thunderstorm area. Seeing that the terrifying thunderstorm failed to break the final protection, several wizards couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief, and then looked at the figure in the middle of the thunderstorm with worry and admiration. Several magical fluorescents flashed across Grindelwald's body. After the dense lightning entered his body, he quickly fell silent. The cloak that was draped like a silk fabric also looked incredible, directly giving the terrifying heat caused by thunderstorms to isolated. Grindelwald stood quietly in the middle of the thunderstorm looking for the hidden space node. Under the influence of such a terrifying thunderstorm, some hidden traces of magic would be revealed. The strength is not enough. Grindelwald opened his eyes suddenly, raised his old wand and pointed it at Thunderbird, saying, "Drill my heart and cut my bones." Thunderbird let out a painful wailing. Continuous lightning fell from the dark clouds, arousing thunder. The flashing arc became more and more dense, and fine cracks appeared on the originally strong magical barrier. The four wizards hiding outside only felt a tingling scalp, praying that the magic barrier could be firmer, and unconsciously stepped back a few steps. A smile appeared at the corner of Grindelwald's mouth. After the thunderstorm intensified again, he could already clearly feel the connection point between the two spaces. At this moment, Grindelwald accurately lifted the old magic wand and pierced it at the position of the node, as if punctured a blister. The scattered ripples spread in all directions. Not long after, a width of about 3 meters high, the passageway appeared in front of everyone. The horrible arc gradually subsided, and the continuous triggering of lightning made the already injured Thunderbird into a state of weakness. More importantly, it has found that its various methods are ineffective against the wizard in front of it. Instead, it was used by the other party to achieve something kind of purpose. The magical barrier shrouded around shattered at this moment, and the wizards cautiously gathered around and asked Grindelwald for instructions on the next task. "You stay here. Don't let other people come in," Grindelwald said directly, and then strode into the dark magical passage. What he was going to was the residence and burial place of an alchemist master. There must be all kinds of dangerous magic traps inside. There is no need to lose manpower for nothing. After Grindelwald left, this was temporarily opened up, and the unstable passage was slowly closed. Such a terrible thunderstorm, what exactly does Grindelwald want to do? According to this, in the dense forest hundreds of meters away, Marx mumbled to himself as he watched the falling lightning in the sky in astonishment. He didn't think that the captured Thunderbird could make such a fierce resistance under Grindelwald's hands. So he said that this must be intentional by the other party. Or in other words, the other party caught Thunderbirds to create this thunderstorm. Marx silently thought of www.mentalnovel.com again, speeding up, and there was such a big movement in front of him. Even if he didn't smell the smell in the air, he could know where the Thunderbird was. However, the closer I got, the more familiar Marx the surrounding woods became. When did he seem to be here? Just as Marx was thinking about it, the figures of the four wizards in front of them had already appeared in front of them. Grindelwald didn't seem to be there, and Marx confirmed the information at first glance, but he was uncertain whether the opponent had left, or that it was a trap. Thinking of the thunderstorm just now, and looking at the bleak scene plowed by lightning and shockwaves ahead, Marx quickly determined that this was probably not a trap, otherwise there was no need to make such a fancy. After a moment of delay, Rolf had chased him from behind. He leaned down and hid in the bushes, glanced at the four wizards not far away, and said, "I have one person and two on the right." "No need. Just hide it." Marx refused Rolf's help and jumped out of the hiding place while speaking. The speed of the cheetah was astonishingly fast. With the blessing of magic power, only an afterimage could be seen. The nearest wizard didn't even have time to react, so he was slapped and flew out. The enemy attack. It's a wizard. The wizards who can follow Grindelwald are naturally elite. Although the attack only happened for an instant, some people found out what was wrong at the first time. A normal cheetah can never run so fast, let alone slap a person into the air with a paw. So the only possible attacker is Animagus. Still looking for Hogwarts Blood Wizard free novel? Baidu direct search. It's easy to read novels. Chapter 909 3 Hallows, the 9th chapter of the text. The 3 sacred artifacts add more for the leader. 2021012193712899. Reductor bone to pieces. Petrificus all petrochemicals. The other 2 wizards were not slow to react at all. They drew out their wands in a panic and pointed them at the cheetah that popped up. Several spell beams flew past them in an instant. Facing the attack of a few people, Marx did not evade. His body disintegrated into a ball of flames, and the light beam that flew directly passed through his body. What kind of witchcraft is this? The wizards who witnessed this scene couldn't believe their eyes, but before they understood what was going on, the flames ran into them. A violent explosion sounded in the dense forest, and the raised firelight blasted the 3 people out in an instant. Then, the scattered flames gradually gathered together, and Marx's figure soon reappeared in the clearing. Amazing. Rolf walked out of the hiding place, looked at the mess on the ground, silently put the wand back out, couldn't help but sigh. He now somewhat believes that the headlines of the Euro Daily newspaper are not bragging. When the opponent graduated, he probably really defeated the 3 eliters. Crackling. The sound of an electric arc suddenly came over. Marx turned his head and took a look, and saw that the Thunderbird on the right side tied by an iron chain was lying low on his body, making a deep chirping sound. This is a feeling. Threat defensive posture. Come and appease it, Marx said to Rolf, and then strode to the wizard who had been slapped by him just now, grabbed the other's collar and forced him to look directly into your own eyes. Scenery. The wizard originally planned to resist, but he was dizzy with a claw on his head, and his mind sank completely when he met Marx's eyes. A large number of broken memory fragments quickly poured into Marx's mind. After scanning the other party's impressive memories over the past few months, Marx's face suddenly became very ugly. He already understood why Grindelwald came to France suddenly. The other party was looking for Nicola May's residence, or to put it another way, Grindelwald came for the Resurrection Stone. This is the last of the 3 sacred artifacts. Once Grindelwald succeeds, Marx doesn't know what will happen, but it will definitely not be a good thing. It's just that Marx is somewhat puzzled. How did Grindelwald know that the Resurrection Stone is in the safe house of Nicola May? And how to determine the location of the space node? You must know that before his death, Nicolene was fully prepared in order not to be disturbed, and even erased the coordinates in his mind. It is not imprudent. Grindelwald has no reason to know these 2 intelligences. Correct. Could it be that Dumbledore said it? Marx thought for a while and thought it was impossible. Dumbledore had no reason to betray his old friend. Did you find anything? Rolf walked over and asked. Grindelwald entered the residence of the alchemist Nicola May. I have to stop him, Marx said as he walked toward the position where Grindelwald stood in the wizard's memory, closing his eyes to feel the scene. The traces of magic remaining in the space. Since the passageway entered was only opened once a few minutes ago, and the method was very rough, the remaining magic traces were very obvious. Marx could clearly sense it, and there was no need to make many preparations in advance like Grindelwald. After a while, Marx opened his eyes again and waved his wand swiftly, and the dark space channel emerged. Are you going to go in like this, McClown? Now that we know his purpose, we'd better notify the people of the Ministry of Magic to deal with it, Rolf exhorted, although Marx's strength exceeded his expectations. But Grindelwald is a well-known dark demon after all. Just relying on the 2 of them to break in is no different from dying. It's too late. Nicole LeMay is my teacher. I will never sit back and watch Grindelwald destroy his cemetery and residence, Marx said decisively. If he had the idea of watching and running away when he was chasing before, then now there is only the belief that he must stop the opponent. In addition, Grindelwald has been in France for at least 2 months. Who knows if there is any other eyeliner in the French Ministry of Magic, and this time Grindelwald has already succeeded. Thinking of this, Marx stepped in without hesitation. Of course, before leaving, did not forget to tell Rolf to look at the dark wizards who had passed out. Rolf waved his magic wand to conjure a few ropes to bind the dark wizard, but the sniff lying on his shoulders was grabbing his paws and looking anxiously in the direction of the space passage. It smelled a smell of treasures. Do you also think we should help? Rolf comforted Sniff, muttering to himself. He was also very worried about letting Marx chase after him alone, but he might not be able to help much with his strength. Wait. It doesn't seem like there is no chance. Until novel.com. Rolf suddenly turned his head and glanced at the Thunderbird next to him. When he was in the forest just now, he had seen thunderstorms from him. How horrible it is. This is definitely a big deal. Not to mention that the Thunderbirds are very fast and can take them on a run in a crisis situation. After thinking about it again and again, Rolf vigorously waved his wand and broke the iron chain that bound Thunderbird. Before he was healed and soothed, he had already gained Thunderbird's trust initially, so he was not worried that the other party would attack him. I know you don't like wizards so much, but we are going to deal with the person who attacked you, so we need your help. Rolf approached patiently step by step, gently stroking Thunderbird's golden feathers, and finally tested written on the back of the opponent. It probably understood Rolf's words. Thunderbird did not drive Rolf off his back, and sparked a few flashes of lightning to expand the channel that was about to be closed, and then flapped his wings and took Rolf to drill together. Go in. Accompanied by a period of space conversion, when Marx came back to his senses again, a wide courtyard came into view. Unlike the previous few visits, this place has been severely damaged. The decorative knight statue at the door has been broken into several sections, and the alchemy creatures trimming the flowers and plants have only one piece of debris left. Obviously they have all resisted heroically, but they failed to stop the enemy's invasion. A big hole was punched in the wall of the house in front, and the faint blue fire was constantly licking along the edge. It took Marx 2 or 3 seconds to suppress it, so as not to burn the whole house. I squeezed my wand and ran in quickly. Still looking for HogWarts Blood Wizard free novel? Baidu direct search. It's easy to read novels. Chapter 910 Repeated Room Text. Chapter 910 The Repeated Room. As soon as I stepped into the door, Marx realized that it was wrong, because the scene in the room was completely different from what he had imagined. Inside was a boxy room, except for the walls. There were only 3 doors corresponding to 3 directions. He stayed in Nicole LeMay's house for several months and had never seen such a room before. Is it a special defense mechanism? Marx thought silently. However, time was limited, and Marx did not dare to delay too long. After spending more than 10 seconds of observation, he tentatively opened the door on the right. There is a long aisle in front, and at the end of the aisle is another door. Marx walked in quickly, and after opening the door, he suddenly realized that this was another door, nothing but a door. Room. With an inexplicable premonition in Marx's heart, he tried to choose another door and opened it as before. As expected, there was a narrow aisle in front of him. After trying this for several minutes, Marx's brows frowned and tightened, and he found that this place seemed to be an endless loop of space. No matter which door he opened, the scene behind it was the same. Had it not been for the annoying magic traps and guards in some of the rooms, Marx would have wondered if he had returned to the original point. After running around for a while, Marx forced himself to calm down, and now no matter how anxious it is, it will not help. But it will only be a waste of work. What is the law? Marx looked around the room of about 30 square meters in front of him, and stared at the 4 doors, front, rear, left, and right for a long time, trying to find some clues. but no matter how you look at these doors, they are exactly the same. Could it be that there are no rules at all, everything is random, and whether you can go out depends on luck? Or is it that Nicole LeMay did not set up a so-called exit at all in order not to be disturbed after death, intending to consume the enemy in the repeated room? Many thoughts flashed in Mark's mind one by one. If this were the case, wouldn't he be unable to get out? Of course, there is a more extreme cracking method, which is to blow up these rooms directly and see if you can find the exit. However, in this way, it is likely to cause the independent space created by Nicole LeMay using magic to completely collapse, burying everything together. As long as you cast a spell, it will inevitably leave traces of magic power. Marx muttered to himself, trying to close his eyes to sense. The free magic power gradually covered the entire room like tentacles. Under the magical induction, Marx discovered that all the rooms were illusory magical creations, and they were connected to each other by some kind of power. Realizing this, Marx tried to enter the second, third, and fourth rooms again, and soon discovered their subtle differences. This difference is not on the surface, but on the level of magic. In an easy-to-understand language, his place is like a huge maze, and magic gives each room a different number. If he can figure out the order in which these numbers represent, then he will be able to find the exit position. Realizing this, Marx regrouped and explored the countless rooms and corridors. As a result of the practice of panic and occlusion, Marx's memory is far superior to ordinary people. He can clearly remember every door he has opened, and constructed a three-dimensional image of the entire maze in his mind. Just when Marx opened the 42nd door, the living room in memory finally appeared before his eyes. Marx, who was tortured by the maze to the point of collapse, slowly breathed a sigh of relief. However, at this moment, a warning sign suddenly surged from his heart, and the knight statue with only half of its body on the ground smashed with a long sword without warning. The heavy stone sword slashed horizontally, unimaginably fast. Marx only heard a harsh whistling sound, and the long sword was already close in front of him, cutting his whole person in half from the shoulder. But the strange thing is that there was no blood flowing out of the cut wound, and Marx's separated body quickly disintegrated into flames, and gathered again. Reducto Marx, who had avoided the attack, waved his magic wand backhand, and a brilliant spell beam instantly blasted the knight statue to pieces. The magic guard left by the teacher is really merciless, Marx said with emotion, and looked around. There are also traces of invaded here. There are broken statues and destroyed magic traps everywhere. The spiral staircase leading to the second floor blew up half of it. This means that Grindelwald has passed here, and Marx's heart suddenly lifted up. While praying that the magical protection left by Nicole LeMay can withstand one or two, he climbed the stairs at the fastest speed and looked at the figure of Grindelwald. Several rooms on the second floor were empty. The beds and cabinets inside disappeared without a trace. Probably Grindelwald used some method to erase all irrelevant things in order to find the resurrection stone. Marx can only cast his gaze into the room at the end of the corridor. Nicole LeMay once told him not to open www.untlenovel.com. But now he can't care about that much anymore. Pushing open the door gently, the room was very dark, but the space was wider than expected, and it looked like a solemn auditorium at a glance. The golden-eared torches on both sides burned blazingly, extending to the high platform at the end of the room, where two pure white coffins were placed. Needless to say, Marx also knew that the coffins must be Nicole LeMay and his wife, and Grindelwald was standing under the high platform at this moment, staring at the diamond-shaped crystals inlaid on the opposite wall. But he did not rush forward, because there was a cleverly set-up magical barrier, even for him. As tricky. Shinfeng Yu eyeing. Marx didn't mean to say hello, taking advantage of the gap in Grindelwald's distraction, silently cast the spell, Raising his hand is the ultimate move. Mentalnovel.com. Getting cash. Follow the VX public account. Mentalnovel.com. Get cash. The invisible and invisible magic blade slid through the air and pierced Grindelwald's brain directly. Just before the hit, the latter keenly tilted his head, and dodged it dangerously. The blade of magic power directly hit the magic barrier behind, but it failed to make any ripples. Marx McClown. Grindelwald turned his head, looked at Marx, who walked in step by step, and said indifferently, "I didn't expect you to come to France." "Of course I will be here. Nicole Lemay is my teacher, and this is his cemetery." Marx's tone is very unkind. Compared to the so-called Resurrection Stone, he is even more angry that the other party disturbed Nicole Lemay's sleep. "Please, I can't finish writing 2 chapters today. Wait for tomorrow to add more." Still looking for Hogwarts Blood Wizard free novel? Baidu direct search. It is easy to read novels. Chapter 912 Mighty Grindelwald. Text Chapter 912 The Mighty Grindelwald. Grindelwald didn't seem to be surprised by this. He lightly tapped the wand in his hand and said slowly, "I didn't want to disturb here, but it's a pity that your teacher took away something that didn't belong to him." Resurrection Stone? Marx turned his head slightly to look at the diamond-shaped crystals inlaid on the wall, and immediately confirmed Grindelwald's intention. "I am afraid that the maker of the Resurrection Stone would have died long ago. Naturally, there is no such thing as the owner. Since Principal Dumbledore chose to give the Resurrection Stone to Master Nicole Lemay, this thing is his possession." Marx added, "Send? I'm afraid it may not be." A sarcastic smile appeared on Grindelwald's face. Marx was taken aback for a moment, and then took a deep look at Grindelwald. "To be precise, of course, Dumbledore did not give the Resurrection Stone to Nicole Lemay, but only asked the other party to repair it, but this information should only be dead. Nicole Lemay, Dumbledore, and I know it." Could it be that Grindelwald really got this information from Dumbledore? "I don't intend to be hostile to you, McClown. Nor should we be enemies." Grindelwald approached step by step and said in a low, hoarse voice, "You and I said that the power you have should be used in more important places, such as ruling muggles, or controlling the world?" Marx asked with a sneer. "The correct way is to let more suitable people stand in more suitable positions," Grindelwald corrected. "Clashes will come sooner or later, even if the wizards are not malicious. Our existence is a substantial threat to muggles." Marx didn't say a word, and these 2 or 3 sentences couldn't shake his mind. Grindelwald's expression was obviously regretful. "It's a pity that you chose the wrong path." "That's right. This place is probably also suitable as your cemetery. If you can do it, try it." Marx's patience had reached its limit, and as he spoke, he raised his wand and waved it vigorously. Serpensortia oolong out of the hole. Facing Grindelwald, Marx did not dare to be careless. The alchemy device on his right wrist lit up slightly, and under the blessing of huge magic power, a terrifying python with a length of 90 feet was winding from the tip of the stick, crushed out and bit at the opponent with his mouth long. Grindelwald didn't panic. He didn't see any movement, and wisps of blue flames appeared in front of him, and finally condensed into a huge fireball and plunged into the python's mouth. The next moment a violent explosion sounded over, and the violent shockwave instantly extinguished the burning torch round it, and even the solid stone base cracked a series of fine cracks. In the smoke and dust in the sky, the huge python was directly blown off half of its body, and the scarlet blood was spilled like raindrops. Suddenly, a white spot of light faintly flashed in front, and within a moment of effort, it flew in front of you. The illusory white behemoth stepped on the mist, and the spiral-shaped horns on top of its head were facing. "That is the shadow of the unicorn." Grindelwald knew the difficulty of this magic. The old magic wand in his hand was shocked, and the blood drop suspended in the air turned into a thick rope as if it had been guided, tightening the shadow of the unicorn tightly bound. But this is not without a price. The rope formed by the blood bead is almost consumed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Without waiting for Grindelwald to cast the spell again, 3 invisible and invisible magical blades struck from the smoke and dust. Although they can't be seen by the eyes, Grindelwald can easily control the magical blades under the induction of magic. Trend, easily avoided. After a few short encounters, Grindelwald, who had been passively defending, suddenly spoke. "If your power is only this, then stay here today." Grindelwald lifted his wand lightly, and a large amount of faint blue flames emerged from the tip of the wand. In just a few seconds, it turned into a sea of fire and surged forward like a wave. Mark's face was dignified, and the magic wand in his hand quickly swiped, and a barrier made up of dense white flames rose out of thin air. 2 fierce fires of different colors collided and melted and swallowed each other, and the heat wave stirred the ground. Layers of stone and bricks were peeled off, and the whole house shook. Under the blessing of the old magic wand, the intensity of the fierce fire released by Grindelwald was simply terrifying. For the first time, Marx had a disadvantage in the flame competition, and could only continue to cast spells to maintain this layer of protection. Crimson dragon scales gradually appeared on Marx's face, and the power of the technique was also improved to a certain extent. But even such a blue sea of fire was still advancing a little bit. However, this did not seem to be the limit of Grindelwald, and the beam of 3 spells in a row quickly pierced through the heavy flames and shot over. Marx's complexion changed slightly, and his body collapsed into a flame and barely avoided the past, but his heart sank. Grindelwald's power is probably stronger than he expected, so he feels completely suppressed. I experienced it the last time I fought with Dumbledore. After losing a steady stream of magical support, www.mentalnovel.com, the protection constructed by white flames was breached almost instantly. The turbulent heat wave swept through, and countless fierce mimicry behemoths were like ecstasy messengers in hell, howling in the continuous sea of fire. All curses are over. Marx stepped back, but the wand was pointed forward, an inexplicable force spreading in all directions centered on him, and for a while suppressed the momentum of the blue sea of fire. But Marx knew that this was just a stopgap measure, and Lehuo directly surrounded him in a ring under the control of Grindelwald. It was obvious that the opponent wanted to block his retreat. At this critical juncture, a golden bird suddenly broke in. After seeing Grindelwald's figure in the fire, it waved its wings and issued an angry scream, and several sturdy lightnings also smashed towards it. Grindelwald, who had planned to siege Marx to death, was forced to stop, and instead blocked the Thunderbird attack. At the moment Grindelwald was distracted, Marx weakened his maintenance of the end of all curses, and poured most of his magic power into the wand. Descendium left and right separation. Marx yelled sharply. With the blessing of huge magic power, this magic that is so simple that a little wizard can easily master it, shows unimaginable power. Several deep cracks were like spider webs, and with Marx's pointing, they continued to spread on the floor tiles, and almost instantly the floor under Grindelwald's feet collapsed. I failed to complete the 2 chapters when I failed, so I won't say anything to continue tomorrow. If I can finish writing these days, I will try to update them twice. Still looking for Hogwarts Blood Wizard free novel? Baidu direct search. It is easy to read novels. Chapter 913, The Sixth Blood Fusion. The 913th chapter of the text, The Sixth Blood Fusion. Beep. The angry Thunderbird would naturally not give up this good opportunity to fall into the rock. A flickering thunderlight appeared on the tail wing, and a powerful thunderstorm immediately condensed, smashing Grindelwald into the bottomless abyss. Without Grindelwald's control, the fierce fire's offensive suddenly slowed down, and under the constraints of the end of all curses, it was quickly suppressed. However, before Marx could breathe a sigh of relief, the entire second floor shook, and the floor under his feet quickly cracked, spreading cracks almost all over the entire floor. Here is going to collapse. Quick, this way. Rolf rode the Thunderbird towards Marx's side, stretched out his right hand, and greeted eagerly. Although Marx possessed a certain amount of air combat ability, He did not refuse Rolf's kindness. Once he grasped his opponent's hand, he used his strength to climb onto Thunderbird's broad back. "Thank you, Mr. Scamander." Marx patted Rolf on the shoulder and said gratefully, "Don't be so dismissive, just call me Rolf." Rolf laughed and said, pointing to Thunderbird under him, "And I didn't do anything, mainly because of it." Thunderbird screamed loudly twice, demonstrating his existence. "Well, thank you too, Lord Thunderbird," Marx said helplessly. At the same time the two were chatting, most of the floor tiles on the second floor had collapsed, and through the deep cracks, the scene downstairs could be vaguely seen. Rolf helped that Grindelwald would be smashed to death by the falling bricks, so that they would be completely safe. It's a pity and hope that these falling wall bricks solidified in midair before they hit the ground, as if they were held by a huge hand, quickly gathered and spliced together. In just 3 or 4 seconds, a rock giant with a height of 9 meters appeared in front of the two of them. "Is Grindelwald's polymorphism so good?" Marx's expression was extremely solemn. He only knew that Grindelwald had a high level of knowledge in black magic, but he didn't want the opponent's skills in polymorphism to be equally terrifying. "I just want to come to Dumbledore." "Now is not the time to think about this." Rolf's scalp numb, because the rock giant on the opposite side has already waved his palm and patted it. "There are many obstacles." Rolf gritted his teeth and shouted loudly. A magic barrier emerged. However, in front of the rock giant, this layer of protection was as thin as paper. Torn apart. An electric arc burst out of Thunderbird's body. His speed climbed again, and he flew dangerously from under his huge palm. Rolf lay on Thunderbird's back, feeling the strong wind from above his head, and experiencing the feeling of death. "Think of a way, McClown," Rolf said anxiously. The tentative defense just now made him understand that Grindelwald's strength is not something he can resist. The difference between the two can be compared to sniffing and the dragon. The only thing he can rely on is the wizard in front of him, who is several years younger than himself. In thinking about it, Marx glared at Rolf angrily, hesitated and decided to take a gamble. Otherwise the resurrection stone would definitely fall into Grindelwald's hands. After making up his mind, Marx directly took out the 2 bottles of potions in his pocket, and started the final process of blood fusion potions on Thunderbird's back. Nicole LeMay's cabin is not too big. The Thunderbirds are restrained everywhere in such a small space, and they can't give full play to the advantage of speed at all. They are surrounded by danger under the attack of the giant rock. Grindelwald probably didn't want to delay any longer. The faint blue fire ignited again, emerging in all directions to further compress Thunderbird's hiding space. Rolf was almost desperate, and Marx next to him filled the adjusted potion in one breath. The cyan liquid gradually enters the stomach along the throat, and the taste is more special than the rest of the blood fusion potions. There seems to be a slight arc in these cyan liquids, and the hairs of Marx all stand up, and his mental perception also changes. Be more sensitive. But this is not good. After all, he is currently in battle, and he can perceive the dangerous aura from all directions, which will make him calm and distracted. Most importantly, this new force was quickly resisted by other forces in the body, and the originally constructed balance was instantly broken. Marx's complexion was red and white, and his magic power spread out uncontrollably. Such an abnormality naturally attracted Rolf's attention. "Are you okay, McClown?" Rolf asked eagerly. He thought that Marx was playing a potion like a blessing potion. This is the time when only great luck can help them escape to heaven. Who knew that Marx was about to explode just after drinking it? So much so that Rolf began to wonder if the other party was too anxious to take the wrong potion. Marx didn't answer. He focused on controlling the magic riot. The protection mode was activated the moment he drank the potion, but the conflict between the 6 bloodlines was too intense. It's suppressed. When Marx was struggling to calm down the first wave of magic riots, the faint blue flames had already burned before his eyes. "It's over. I didn't expect that I would die here." Rolf sighed with a wry smile. He once caught the terrifying rune snake, slept in the dragon's den, and escaped from the Devil of Death several times. Catch, but probably can't hide it this time. It's not over yet. The battle begins now. Marx suddenly stood up straight from Thunderbird's back, facing the sea of fire. His expression unchanged, and holding his wand flat. Reading www.uukanzu.com. Wind. At the same moment Marx spoke, a gust of wind appeared out of thin air in this room of only a few hundred square meters, blocking the sea of fire, and even wrapped fierce fire towards its original owner. Grindelwald's calm complexion finally changed. He waved his wand into a huge golden shield, and the huge rock giant also retreated. Hello everyone, our official account will find gold and red envelopes every day. As long as you pay attention to it, you can receive the last benefit at the end of the year. Please seize the opportunity of the official account. Separate left and right. At this moment, Marx's voice sounded again, as if uttering the law. The ground in the direction of the magic wand split into an abyss, and then the sky full of fire was torn in half, and the golden buckler was torn to pieces after only resisting it for a second. Everything in front of you was forcibly separated, even the wall behind. Fortunately, Grindelwald escaped for a while, and the rock giant who was suffering for him was divided into two parts from head to toe. After a while, it turned into a pile of rubble and collapsed. Grindelwald gave Marx a jealous look, then reached out and put on the cloaked hood, and the whole person disappeared in this room. Just left. Marx frowned, and Grindelwald had escaped his magical induction. But this thought was thrown aside by Marx as soon as it came up, and it was immediately determined that this should be the effect of the invisibility cloak. After all, Nicola May has set up a lot of protection magic in this independent space in order not to be disturbed after death. Any creature is prohibited from using space magic. Only when the control node is found in the correct position can he leave here smoothly. Still looking for Hogwarts Blood Wizard free novel? Baidu direct search. It's easy to read novels. Chapter 914 Deathly Hallows Resurrection Stone. Text Chapter 914 Deathly Hallows Resurrection Stone. When the invisibility cloak appeared in the enemy's hand, Marx then understood the difficulty of this thing. But one thing made him feel a little puzzled. When the invisibility cloak was with Harry, as long as he put on his figure, it would be obscured, and Grindelwald seemed to be able to control it freely. As time passed bit by bit, Marx spent half of his mind on suppressing the magical riot in his body, and the other half focused on dealing with a possible surprise attack by Grindelwald. Just when Marx and others were a little impatient and prepared to use a wide range of magic to force the opponent out, a strong sense of warning suddenly spread from the right side. Thunder. Marx turned his head and quickly waved his magic wand. A blue lightning bolt formed at the tip of the wand and smashed to the right. The speed of lightning is unimaginable. Grindelwald just raised his wand to cast a spell, and the flashing arc hit him first. Grindelwald's face became very ugly. He hadn't thought that the other party had the ability to see through the invisibility cloak, and he ate the magic abruptly. Fortunately, the invisibility cloak provided him with good protection, isolating most of the power of lightning, but otherwise, he could still feel the numbness caused by the current passing through his body. Marx was not forgiving, and he was 100% confident in his perception of danger. His wand was shocked, and several shadowless magical blades flew out. Grindelwald's wand was lightly picked, and a large number of rubble debris immediately gathered together to form a solid rock barrier, which barely resisted Marx's offensive. Rolf just watched Marx fight an invisible transparent man. He couldn't help him. He could only hold Thunderbird's back tightly to prevent himself from falling from the sky. Wait. What about sniffing? When he was free, Rolf suddenly thought of his pet and partner, and hurriedly looked around, but he didn't see him. This made Rolf anxious. He was very worried that his partner would die in the aftermath of the battle. After looking around for several times, Rolf finally breathed a sigh of relief. Because Sniff was still alive, he was now entrenched on the brick wall of the second floor. wondering how to pass the protective barrier in front of him. Realizing what Sniff was doing, Rolf almost didn't get angry. There was a fight here. If they couldn't deal with Grindelwald, all of them would be finished. Sniff was still thinking about stealing treasures from the grave. Marks on the other side is also very uncomfortable. The protection mode has been over half of the time, but his attack on Grindelwald has not made much progress. This is different from the last time I fought against Voldemort. Marks can clearly realize that with this special state, although he can smoothly suppress Grindelwald, he can't defeat the opponent. If this continues, once the protection mode is over, it will be difficult to defeat Grindelwald. Remaining matters of protection mode, 015. The system reminder sounded in his mind, and Marks raised his magic wand to determine the outcome with a single blow, and the alchemy device on his right wrist suddenly lit up. With the continuous supply of magic power, a powerful thunderstorm had formed in an instant. Grindelwald's complexion became very dignified. He almost urged the old wand to the extreme, and a palpable black fluorescence gradually appeared on the wand. Rolf didn't care about sniffing at this time, and the magic brewed by the two made him feel like a catastrophe was imminent in the preparation stage. In the next second, Marks and Grindelwald cast spells at almost the same time, and the two forces collided. An astonishing explosion then sounded in this room of no more than a few hundred square meters. Hundreds of flashing electric arcs violently shot in all directions, and the terrifying shockwaves sent all tables, chairs, fireplaces, and gravel ruins away. Rolf dragged a lot of Thunderbird feathers so that they were not blown away. After finally getting through the fiercest aftermath, Rolf hurriedly raised his head and looked in the direction of Grindelwald, making such a terrifying attack. Even the legendary wizard should die, right? However, Grindelwald was still standing. It seemed that the injury was not serious, but he was forced to escape from the invisibility state, and the silk-like cloak on his body became very dim, probably for a short time. Unusable. Marks was also looking at Grindelwald. The reason he didn't pursue it was because the large-scale mobilization of magic power just now almost caused an imbalance in the body's power. After this moment of delay, the powerful blessing brought by the protection mode has disappeared. The two of them just stared at each other and didn't dare to act rashly, but the house seemed to be crumbling under the aftermath of a series of wars. The surrounding walls were cracking, and huge stones were constantly falling from the roof. Is this going to collapse? Rolf looked uneasily. If Thunderbird hadn't reacted quickly, he was almost hit by a falling stone, and then Mark's answer made his heart sink to the bottom. Now.novel.com may be worse. Marks glanced at the cracked wall. The outside was not a courtyard but a dark and deep space turbulence, which proved that it was not this room that was broken, but an independent space constructed by Nicole LeMay. Then what should we do? Do we want temporary truce? Rolf was obviously aware of this, and said very anxiously. He had tried it just now. It is impossible to use apparition in this independent space. Once the space is caught in the turbulence. So don't they all have to die here? Marks did not answer. Even if they wanted to leave now, Grindelwald would probably not agree. Once a flaw was revealed, a storm-like attack would follow, and he would not just sit back and watch Grindelwald leave. Click. A crisp sound suddenly broke the tacit understanding between the two. As the entire space was cracking, the magic barrier guarding the coffin also shattered. The most excited one was Sniff. It was waiting here with fire and lightning. When the magic barrier disappeared, it rushed in with its paws, stepped on Nicole LeMay's coffin, and died. He clung to the diamond-shaped spar inlaid on the wall. However, before it was happy, a huge adsorption force pulled it to fly. Sniff and fly. Marks keenly seized the opportunity to sniff and steal the resurrection stone, and directly cast a spell to pull it over, lest this thing be snatched by Grindelwald. It's just that the latter's reaction is not slow at all. Under the swing of the old magic wand, the half-flying Sniff freezes in midair. The front and back two powerful forces sandwich it. Sniff only feels that his body is going torn apart. Still looking for HogWarts Blood Wizard free novel? Baidu Direct Search. It's easy to read novels. Chapter 915 The Coffin is flying in the sky. Text Chapter 915 The coffin flies in the sky. Squeak. Sniffer was forced to utter an unpleasant scream. Under the joint pull of the two magical powers, its body kept flying up and down like a millet, but the four claws still held the resurrection stone in his arms tightly. When the form was deadlocked, Rolf summoned the courage to draw out his wand and shouted at Grindelwald, "Except for your weapons." The crimson light beams flashed across the dark room. If it were normal, Grindelwald would not appreciate such a weak attack, but at this moment, he was fully focused on confronting Marx, but he could only be forced to retreat and evade. However, it was just this slight distraction, and Sniff flew to the other side and fell into Marx's hands. "Good job, Sniff, you made a contribution this time," Marx said with great joy, but the movement on his hand was not slow. He forcibly snatched the resurrection stone from under Sniff's claws and stuffed himself in the pocket. Sniff, who was glad that he was able to escape, had a dumbfounded look. The treasures it had obtained through all kinds of hardships hadn't covered the heat, so it was gone. Just before it protested, Marx, who turned his face faster than turned the book, returned it to Rolf. "Go over there, Thunderbird." Marx did not dare to delay for a moment. After winning the resurrection stone, he directed Thunderbird to move to the coffin of Lome and his wife. Grindelwald naturally couldn't tolerate the resurrection stone being snatched by Marx in this way. He waved his wand furiously, and the faint blue fire scattered on the ground immediately condensed and turned into fireballs and shot towards the opponent. Wind. Marx held his magic wand and shook slightly, and a strong storm suddenly hung in the house, detonating all the fireballs flying in the air. The house that was crumbling in the harsh explosion completely collapsed, and the deep darkness gradually eroded into the house from outside, and both Marx and Rolf felt a sense of imminent disaster. "How do we leave here now?" Rolf said solemnly. "Wait." Marx slowly uttered a word. "Wait? What are you waiting for?" Rolf is very confused, and this space is about to collapse completely after waiting. Marx concentrating on it, staring at the two coffins that had collapsed in front of the house, and waved his magic wand to lift them up with magical power. The deep gloom has spread to their sides, and the two can vaguely hear the roar of the space cracking. "It's now, get ready," Marx shouted loudly. "What are you going to prepare?" Rolf asked eagerly. "Run," Marx yelled, and collapsed into a large group of forest white flames. He immediately wrapped Rolf beside him, Thunderbird under his feet, and the two coffins together. "Don't resist, it'll take you out." Rolf only heard a sound in his ears, and then he felt a whirl of heaven and earth, endless flames occupying all of his vision, and it took a long time to calm down. When Rolf came back to his senses again, he found that he was no longer in the broken room. The azure blue space came into view again, and the gentle breeze that passed by slowly eased his tense emotions. The only thing in common is that they are still standing on Thunderbird's back, and the coffins of Nico Lemay and his wife are also suspended on both sides. "We came out." Rolf sat down on the bird's back, his hands and feet soft. He almost thought he was dead just now. "How did you do it, McClown?" Rolf turned his head and asked curiously. He remembered that the unique space could not be operated. "A respectable professor once told me that at the moment when the independent space collapses, the people inside will leave that space for a short time, and all the protections will fail. If you can grasp the opportunity, you can successfully escape," Marx said with emotion. Rolf gave him a stunned look. Just listening to Marx's explanation can understand how dangerous this method is. It is not an exaggeration to describe it as a dead end, but Van Marx's reaction is slow for even half a second. They will be torn to pieces by the turbulence of space. But it was the professor who taught such strange knowledge, but it saved their lives. Rolf's face was a little weird, but before he could continue to inquire, his attention was attracted by a few screams coming from below. He sat on the Thunderbird's back and looked down. The towering buildings suddenly came into view. Only then did he realize that he and the others were riding the Thunderbird over the city. and their whereabouts were already covered by some moles. I found out. Where is this? Shouldn't we appear in the jungle that we entered? Rolf frowned and asked strangely. We are in Paris, France. Obviously, there is also a node that can enter that piece of space here. Marx slowly explained. His expression was not so unexpected. Can get it. When he was studying alchemy at Nicole May, once he opened the window to see the streets of Paris. Speaking of www.mtlnovel.com, we might be in trouble. Rolf had some headaches. They finally got rid of Grindelwald, but they came back to the door again soon after the trouble. It is not a trivial matter to be seen by so many moles with the traces of magic, causing large-scale riots. If it is more serious, they might go to jail. Rolf can only hope that this time he and Marx will stop the Grindelwald conspiracy and will be able to defeat the Merits. At the same time, in Paris, in front of the Arc de Triomphe, hundreds of moles all looked up at the big golden bird flying above them, shocked and unspeakable. God, what kind of bird is this? It actually has 3 pairs of wings. The Coffin. The Coffin flies in the sky. Look, there are still people on the bird's back. I said, there must be wizards in this world. This must be witchcraft. The moles were all agitated. Some even took out their cameras and wanted to record the magical scene. A few mole police officers in uniform even pulled out their pistols, but didn't know whether they should be launched. Attack, land, hurry down, and go to that roof. Marx also realized that it was wrong, and hurriedly directed Thunderbirds to stop on the roof of a building. After flying like this, the moles in the city might be able to see them. Thunderbird was very obedient and stopped as instructed. Marx put down the 2 coffins, and then waved his wand to set a mole expulsion curse around him, lest some moles who didn't have eyes ran up. Just when Marx had done all this, a dozen Frenchers had arrived and surrounded them. Still looking for Hogwarts Blood Wizard free novel? Baidu direct search. It's easy to read novels.